Hey, what is going on guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS5 jailbreak news update, rounding up all the latest news updates here for the past week. And there has been a ton of updates once again to get through. And the first one is a pretty significant one. We now have 4.51 support for the PS4 fake package enabler. So if you are on 4.51, you can finally access PS4 fake packages, PS4 Homebrew, PS4 game backups. You can now run that on 4.51. And this was made possible by Jailbreak 3000 once again, who was also the one who ported it from 4.03 to 4.50. So this means we have the three main firmwares, 4.03, 4.50 and 4.51 now supported. So this means anybody who's on a jailbreakable firmware from 3.0 to 4.51 can technically access this if they choose to, by obviously updating from an older firmware to 4.03 or 4.50 or 4.51. Obviously that's still not recommended because it will get ported to those older firmwares eventually. You know, those 3.x firmwares will get supported eventually. Slayer's Govi's script is still being updated. Currently it's able to get just over 40 offsets out of round about 70, so it's getting there. Eventually it will be supported if you just be patient and wait, rather than updating to a supported firmware right now. So again, it's up to you, but I would still recommend on waiting until it gets ported to your firmware rather than updating. But the good news is people on 4.51 who never had that option, they never had the option to update to a compatible firmware. Now it's supported on their firmware and they're able to access it, which is great news. Now this news is still pretty fresh right now at the time of recording, so some of the exploit hosts may not have the 4.51 supported payload available just yet, but they will do soon. There is a payload that you can download right now to test on 4.51. I'll leave it linked in the video description. You can just inject it with Netcat GUI or some other payload injector right now in order to get it up and running, or you can just wait a few hours and the exploit host will get updated to include the payload and you can just run it from whatever your favorite exploit host is. Okay, next we have Sistro, who has released a couple of teasers showing that Sistro is now working on the PS5. Now this is a pretty big deal. If you're new to the scene and you don't know who Sistro is basically the one behind the etaHEN project on the PS4, the main developer behind that, which is kind of like an all-in-one payload for jailbreaking the PS4. It's got a ton of features all included. It's a pretty big deal that we now have Sistro working on the PS5 and potentially working on something similar by the looks of things. So the first teaser that was released by Sistro shows some custom shell UI on the PS5, and this is pretty significant because it took a long time before we had custom shell UI for the PS4, and this is kind of like augmenting the existing UI on the PS5 to add additional options that are specific to PS5 jailbreaks, so jailbroken consoles. So for example, on the PS4, there's a whole cheat menu that's integrated for enabling and disabling cheats in real time for your games, as well as things like being able to enable and disable the FTP server and the bin loader, custom UI elements like showing the title ID of games on the home menu, and various things like that are pretty handy. So it's good that we have this already for the PS5. So the second screenshot that we got showcased a payload PS5 debug coded by CTN and Sistro, with special thanks to Golden. So CTN and Golden, I believe, were responsible for the PS4 debug payload, which is essentially a payload that would allow you to connect to remote debugging software. And it looks like we're going to get a PS5 version of this payload. So this should open up a whole new realm of possibilities on the PS5. So for example, the most immediate thing that comes to mind are things like trainers. So the PS4 web trainer by TilerMods could be ported over to work on the PS5, and not just for PS4 games, but also for PS5 games. So we could get PS5 trainers up and running, mod tools of course, remote debugging software. And speaking of remote debugging software, Diz also released a screenshot showing his remote debugging software called Prospero Toolbox, which is going to contain a bunch of useful features. There is a debugger here, or a peek poker, that allows you to read and write memory. There's software breakpoints, registers, and a equivalent to the PS4 cheater application for PS5, which is essentially like a cheat engine application that allows you to search for values in memory. So once that gets released, and it looks like it's going to be released fairly soon, apparently there's not much left to do before we get a release of this software. So that'll be awesome as well. So with all of that coming out, we should see things like, again, trainers, mod tools, and potentially in future offline activation and maybe save mounting coming on the PS5 as well. So lots of cool features to look forward to. Okay, so now let's move on to some bad news, unfortunately. So it looks like the DNS addresses from Al-Azif to block system updates are going to be down for longer than we originally expected. It was originally taken down for maintenance and was supposedly only going to be down for a couple of days, but unfortunately it's going to be down for what looks like a lot longer, maybe even indefinitely, but hopefully not. So Al-Azif says here, it looks unlikely I'm going to be able to differentiate between traffic that's causing issues and PS scene traffic. It's not the same IPs and not enough individually to be flagged as abusive because it looks like normal usage. There are just too many devices using it. I'll keep the IP addresses reserved and hopefully whatever system the IPs are cached in forgets after a while and I can put things back up. Alternatively, if someone wants to fit the bill, $500 a month, let me know and I'll put the DNS back up and keep pretending to be an internet service provider. So for additional context to this, there's a great article over on wololo.net that I highly recommend you check out. I'll leave it linked down in the video description. It goes into more detail about the issues surrounding this DNS. So apparently, according to that article, the issue is relating to an actual internet service provider that has cached Al-Azif's DNS as a legitimate DNS server to use, which has caused way more traffic to go to the DNS than would be originally. And that's driving up the bandwidth costs to a point where it's just not financially viable for Al-Azif to keep running it. So that's the issue right now. Now, initially it was taken down so that perhaps a method could be figured out to kind of block that traffic. And as Al-Azif said there, it doesn't look like it's possible to differentiate between the legitimate PS scene traffic and this traffic coming from the ISP. So the idea at the moment is just to keep the DNS down so that hopefully it will get removed from this ISP because it's no longer functioning, and then it can be brought back up once that has happened. But we don't know if that'll happen or if it will remain reserved in that ISP for God knows how long. So yeah, that's the issue we have at the moment with Al-Azif's DNS. So what are your options in the meantime? Well, there's another DNS address that you can use from Nomadic, which is 62.210.38.117. If you use that as your primary DNS in your PS5 network settings, that will block the system updates. So it's definitely worth using that if you don't have another option. So alternatively, you can use the Docker container that was released by Al-Azif. So this will just allow you to set up the DNS locally on your computer. So all you have to do is download Docker, of course, for if you're on Windows, just download the Docker installer and install it. And then once you've done that, you can download Al-Azif's Docker container, edit the configuration file and change the IP address to your computer's IP address, and then run the bat script or the sh script if you're on Linux in order to start the Docker container. And once that's up and running, you just set your DNS address in the PS5 network settings to the IP address of your computer, and that will set up the DNS blocker. Alternatively, you can also follow my recent video that shows you guys another method of setting up the DNS blockers, including hosting the whole exploits locally on your computer and even an offline solution by using the offline cache on the exploit host so that you can turn off the internet completely and still access the exploit. So there's lots of different options you can use. I also did a video almost a year ago that includes the method of blocking the updates on your router so that you don't have to worry about using any custom DNS addresses. You can just block the system update links on your router and you'll never have to worry about it. So that's another option too. So lots of different options you can use to block system updates. And again, I'll leave them all linked down there in the video description. So we also have some teasers from Zekoshal, where first of all, he says, seems like Slayers has PS5 selfs working, only PS5 fake packages left for true Homebrew enabler. So yeah, essentially, if we can execute self files, then there's a good chance that we can do things like, PS5 Homebrew, maybe even run PS5 decrypted game dumps, using some kind of other method besides fake packages, like copying the game files somewhere on the hard drive and using something like a donor disk payload to launch it, which is what we had to do originally with the PS4 jailbreak before we had access to fake packages. So that could possibly be done, but hopefully we will get fake packages at some point to make things more convenient for running PS5 games. But at the moment, there's not really been a release of any kind of method to load any PS5 apps right now. So besides that, we also have another tweet below that there where Zeko says that there's something nice coming on Christmas, but not just PS5 related. And then below that, he says, not PS5 does not necessarily mean PS4 only. So obviously you have to take rumors like this with a grain of salt. There always seems to be some rumor as we approach Christmas of something big dropping on Christmas. We always get that pretty much every single year. It was right at one point in like 2021 when we got the, what was it, the 9.00 jailbreak for the PS4, which was around Christmas. I think it was around mid-December. Obviously, at other times, it's turned out to be, you know, not something as significant as it originally seemed. So yeah, just take these rumors with a grain of salt. Maybe we'll see something on Christmas, maybe we won't. But yeah, anyway, that's what we have from Zeko. So moving on from that, we also got the release of the Homebrew store for the PS5, a PS5 compatible version of it from LightningMods. So I've already done a video, a brief video that goes over that. So I'll leave that linked down in the video description if you want to learn how to set that up. Also, we had the etaHEN payload from LightningMods, which is basically a payload that combines all of the main features that we have from other payloads into one. So we have obviously the PS4 fake package enabler included. We have kernel log server, FTP, elf loader, as well as the lib hijacker. And there's two different versions, one that includes illusions patches for the debug menus and 60 FPS, 120 FPS patches. And we have another version that's specifically to be used with Homebrew apps like the Homebrew store and items flow when that releases, because basically it unlocks more functionality for those Homebrew apps. So you've got the etaHEN payload. It was recently updated to version 1.1 from 1.0. And 1.1, the main difference, besides some bug fixes, is the fact that it will actually refresh the kernel log server, the FTP, and the elf loader when your network changes. So when you disconnect and reconnect to the network, it will refresh those processes so that they'll work with your updated network configuration. So that's one change. And then we also got the release of firmware spoofing from Jafar and Zeko. And basically what that does is it allows you to spoof your PS4 SDK version. There's a few different versions that you can spoof, but the main one is the PS4 SDK version that can be spoofed to a higher number, which allows backported games to be installed without having to merge them with the backported update file. So you'll still need to install the backported update, but you will no longer have to merge it with the original game package in order to install them. They'll just install in the same way as any other PS4 fake package. So yeah, that's good. That's now been resolved. We no longer have those issues. And there's a couple of other things that can be spoofed as well. There's like an update version that can be spoofed and a PS5 SDK version that can be spoofed too. And of course, I do have a detailed video already out there that shows you guys the difference in spoofing the different firmware versions and what each version does when you spoof it, as well as the etaHEN payload shows you how to get that up and running. So I'll leave that one linked down in the video description as well if you want to learn more about those features. So anyway, that's pretty much it so far for this news update. Hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe and come back next week for the next update. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.